Okay, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Hello, everybody. Hope you are doing great. You're watching FOADEBATE. Today, I'm fortunate to be joined by John Steppling, a renowned American screenwriter and also political commentator. Our topic today is America's decline in Hollywood style. John, thank you so much for joining us today, and good to be with you.
My pleasure.
You're welcome.
Yep.
Before we dive into the specific questions, I'm really curious to hear your initial perspective on the topic we are discussing today.
Well, I think that it's actually probably more significant, more important than people might immediately think. I mean, the cultural decay in the West is acute. I have a podcast, Aesthetic Resistance, and this topic comes up all the time. I have a blog. I have written about this for 10 years. And I used to teach. I was thinking when you called me this morning, I was thinking about when I started teaching at the Polish National Film School, and that was in the early 2000s. I was there full time for about 6 or 7 years, and I had left Hollywood, where I worked for a decade as a screenwriter and television writer. I left in 1999, and then I was teaching in Poland. And before that, I was involved in theater in the U.S., in L.A. and New York. And from the first film I did in Hollywood was 1985, 52 Pickup. Carol co-produced it, the crazy gangsters, Israeli gangsters at Carol Co. John Frankenheimer was a director, based on an Elmore Leonard book. And that was my first screen credit. That's 1985. The change from 1985 to when I left in 1999 was dramatic. I mean, it was a profound change in the sensibility that producers and studios had about what they were doing, a profound change in what they call the talent, the directors, the actors, all the technicians. In 1985, there was still a generation of people. Hollywood has always been crass and commercial, but in 1985, there was the tail end of a generation or two of people who thought about film as an art form, that there was still an art form called movies, film, cinema. And you saw it with the French New Wave, the British New Wave, the Brazilian New Wave, these movements and directors, everybody from Fassbinder to Antonioni, to Kurosawa, to Godard, and magazines at the time, the Cahiers du Cinema and Sight and Sound out of England. Everybody, these were remarkable films. Bergman, for example. I was just writing about The Seventh Seal, actually, and Bresson's Lancelot du Lac, because they're both about returning knights, returning to Europe from the Crusades and having failed, and the ignominy and despair and depression. And in the case of Seventh Seal, he returns to a plague-ravaged Sweden. These are the kind of films that don't get made today, obviously. You would be laughed out of the meeting if you suggested a script like this. And I remember Brian De Palma and John Boorman, and I forget the third guy, were talking about, Boorman made a film called Point Blank in 1960 with Lee Marvin. It's a masterpiece. It's really quite brilliant film. a crime film, a kind of existential crime film, and he said in the tail end of the 80s, he said, I could never get this film made today. I couldn't raise any money. They wouldn't talk to me about it. And even Brian De Palma, who was perhaps not a great artist, but he said, I can't make the same kind of movies I made 20 years ago. And he was saying this in the 80s at the same interview. Um, Now, fast forward 35 years, the situation is 10 times worse. I mean, it's astounding how bad films are that come out of Hollywood now. So, just on this aesthetic level, there was once, I mean, and even Hollywood studios made in the 1940s and 50s made film noir, uh, really rather remarkable movies. And that was the golden age of American film. And that is all gone. And what you have is the rise of a business model that completely erased considerations of art or cultural importance. TV became a place where the military and the US government, the State Department, made recruitment films. There is not a single Hollywood series produced today that is not a recruitment film for the military. And when I was leaving at the late 1990s, you had representatives from the military, the State Department, sometimes the FBI, who would sit in on story conferences to offer, in quotation marks, technical advice. Today, they're in every meeting from the beginning. They're not there just to give technical advice. They are helping write the scripts. The US government helps write the scripts in Hollywood today. And that's why you see these extraordinarily jingoistic and reactionary films. The Israeli lobby is obviously hugely important. It used to kind of stay under the radar. There were some actually quite okay, supportable Israeli producers that were cynical, perhaps, but they weren't ideological zealots like you have today. There's also the problem of nepotism in Hollywood today. It's a closed shop. And once upon a time, you had directors who would work their way up from copy boys and running errands and laying cable and doing whatever they could and work their way up to finally getting a shot at directing. Um, um, and people like Sam Fuller, say, and what's his name? I get the guy who did. Oh my God, I can't think of his name or the name of his film. I'll think of it. But these guys were the voice of the working class, and that's completely been erased today. You have graduates from elite universities. You have the children of movie stars and producers. You have the children of the ruling class, very rich, who dabble in this business of making film, and uh, you also have, parallel to that, a decline in the literacy of the audience. Um, People today don't read, and they're not educated the way audiences were in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. There were still people that understood the difference between a Douglas Sirk movie and schlock, kitsch, Steven Spielberg. But today, you will go to film schools in the United States, and there are courses on Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg makes terrible movies. He makes junk. He's not a great director. And I've had arguments with people, and they go, "Oh, you're just an elitist. You're being," and I say, "No, my God, you can sit down frame by frame and look at how reductive and simplistic stories are, how rudimentary the editing is, how formulaic it is, and the constant repetition of the same themes, the same message." I know an actress who works a lot. She's a very good actress. But she works a lot, and she's Middle Eastern originally. So she gets cast as the mother of terrorists often. She has done the same scene with the same lines on several different shows within a 2-year period. "My son is not a terrorist." That's what she has to say. Because they just repeat the same stuff. It's incredible. And she laughs about it, but she also knows it's a frightening thing, because I don't think this is going to change. I think it's going to get worse. And I'm convinced, in fact, that the rise of AI, of chatbots and all these things, I'm not sure if they're writing the scripts, but screenwriters today write as if they're AI. So it really doesn't matter. The level of literacy is so low now. The quality of stuff produced is so low that I think we're at the tail end of a certain trajectory that began in the 1920s, German Expressionism, the idea of a 2-hour feature-length film. And that's gone, because nobody produces meaningful films anymore. It's just a disposable amusement park ride. TV is the same, and the ingrained political conservatism, the racism, the Islamophobia, is palpable, is dramatic. I mean, you look at TV series that are rewarded, like Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad's a stunningly racist show, was a stunningly racist show. The character's name is even Walter White. And the message of the show is, yes, dark-skinned people are drug dealers, but we white people, if we wanted to, could be even more successful drug dealers. The message is always Western imperialism is good, white people are important, minority voices are not important, they're given token roles and token appreciation. And the flip side of that is stuff like race neutral casting, inclusive casting, which is just another form of racism. I mean, it's a way to erase history. If you have a black character in England in the early 1800s, and he's acting as if he's accepted by the ruling class, you are erasing the history of slavery. You know, wait a second, that didn't happen. Those people were servants. They were being beaten and starved and lived in slums because it was a huge racist slave-owning society of astonishing inequality. Why are you pretending that didn't exist? Well, because we're trying to be aspirational and provide good models. No, it's because the white empire wants to erase its own guilt. That really is what it is. And so, you know, in the same way we see Western media today controlled by IPAC and the ruling class in the West, you know, it's really quite remarkable. And Trump Trump just threw a Great Gatsby themed party at Mar-a-Lago that cost taxpayers something like $60 million. And the irony of that is it's based on a 1920s book about conspicuous consumption and the arrogance of the ruling class, but Trump doesn't know that because he's never read a book. So the irony is lost on him. Hollywood just made Netflix just released a film called House of Dynamite, a nuclear war cautionary tale. A terrible film, which there's no ending because they have no idea how to write scripts anymore. But it is interesting because it's a fairy tale about international politics. The Diplomat, this very expensive prestige series out right now. I think it just finished its second or third season. Besides being a kind of narcissism project for the lead actress, again, is incredibly reactionary. It's the new West Wing, and it's a fairy tale about international politics. A fairy tale, but I would wager that the majority of Americans think this is like a pretty realistic portrait of how things go. And we're seeing under Trump, though, an era in which the fascism that was sort of kept at arm's length and disguised is now in the open and embraced. And you have ICE agents running around, assaulting people, arresting innocent people without any due process. Off the coast of Venezuela, you have the military blowing up boats without any evidence, without any proof, in violation of all international law. And nobody in the West really cares, not really. It took a naked live streamed genocide in Gaza for people to wake up even a little bit about the state of Israel and what it really is, and that this is the last great colonial project. Now, there's a famous quote that people keep quoting. I have quoted it several times the last few months by Gramsci, and I will paraphrase it. And he said, at the end of an era of one system, as it comes to an end, but before the actual birth of a new system to replace it, there is a period, an interregnum, in which morbid symptoms will appear. It's actually often misquoted, but never mind. So that's where we are. We are in the interregnum. The old empire is dying. We are watching the death of the old empire. The new, whatever is going to replace it, has not appeared yet, maybe only partially in places. And we're seeing a time of morbidity and irrationality and barbarism. Gaza and U.S. foreign policy and the clown show that Trump has unleashed, people like Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, my Lord. So this should be obvious on one level, but your question was about Hollywood and aesthetics. And I think what I'm trying to get at is that what you see in cultural product today, whether it's film, TV, literature, anything, what you are seeing is a reflection of the morbidity of the system at large. You are seeing a reflection of this dying off of Western imperialism and capitalism as it's existed for a few hundred years, and the fact that things are so compulsively repetitive, that they cannibalize themselves. They feed off earlier versions of them. There's no originality, no creativity, no literacy, or there's an audience that can't tell the difference anyway because public education was destroyed under Reagan and has gotten worse and worse and worse. So um, we're seeing the death of the empire, and the only meaningful voices that I hear, almost all the meaningful voices I hear, are coming from various places in the global south. That you hear commentators and the promise for change, but it's difficult. You have this very admirable guy in Burkina Faso. Certain African states are showing enormous independence, kicking out the colonial occupiers. But on the other hand, you still have puppet states like the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, all the Gulf monarchies, Egypt. These are kind of comprador puppet governments who are working hand in glove with Israel and the United States. They don't represent the people yet. In Burkina Faso, you have a leader that's starting to represent the people. Venezuela, I think Maduro has been under enormous pressure since he took office. And given that kind of pressure, I think he's actually done an exemplary job. But it's this period. It's this period of instability, and that's what we see culturally. So
Yeah,
that's my long-winded answer for you.
fantastic. That was fantastic and comprehensive also. For decades, Hollywood has been a primary exporter of the American dream, a key tool of American soft power. In your view, when did that narrative begin to shift? When did Hollywood start holding up a mirror to the nation's internal cracks and contradictions?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a really complicated question, actually. If you go back, traditional thinking, if you go back to the 1950s, post World War II, Hollywood began to make. There were all the sitcoms, Father Knows Best, and Ozzie and Harriet, and I Love Lucy, and all these shows that reflected an idealized vision of the American family, the American dream. You could own your own house and your own car, and dad went to work, and mom raised the kids and baked cookies and muffins, and brother and sis went to school, and it was all very charming and fun. Now, the fact is, of course, that it never really existed, but that dream did exist, and the fantasy did exist. And then the 60s came along, and this was a huge cultural shift. And I've written about this before because I think, partly because I lived through it. I was a teenager. I graduated high school in 69. Um, uh, and it's misunderstood in a way, but it was a genuine cultural revolution of sorts, the 60s. And it started to change things. It was the beginning, the government reaction, Western capital's reaction to the 60s was to circle the wagons and uh, become more authoritarian, more protective of media and message, and that's what they did. So by the 70s and 80s, the U.S. Hollywood was still exporting this American dream idea, but it was mediated with soft criticism and whatnot, and that's okay. And people thought, well, there's progress here. Liberals are self-critiquing a little bit, and by the end of the 80s, and this coincided with the rise of Madison Avenue big marketing firms and the whole idea of marketing campaigns took hold in the 80s, and I don't think that's an accident. So they started to promote very manipulative and a kind of propaganda that was more sophisticated than that which had happened in the 60s and 70s. The 80s saw the intensification of propaganda, the improvement in its manufacture, so that by the 90s, this was the age of the hegemony of Madison Avenue marketing. And in a way, maybe that's never left. But by the 2000s, I think, with the advent of the internet, which really did change a lot, you saw the end of that old model. I think, to answer your question, that's when everything changed. The internet changed everything. And the governments of the West, meaning the United States and UK primarily, were a little slow in reacting to the changes because nobody understood what the internet was doing to life, to culture, to everything. And I know personally, I used to spend a lot of money and time ordering books and getting books sent to me. I certainly can't afford to do that anymore. So I read books online. You can download most things, find them, but it's a different kind of reading. I noticed that I read differently than I did 40 years ago. I still read all the time, but I suspect most people read less than they did. Maybe I read less than I did. I don't know. I certainly read differently than I did. So this was a big change. And you had the rise of a certain kind of Silicon Valley tech bro mentality that had absolute belief in technical, digital technology, rather, and that the future was going to be delivered to you by algorithms and artificial intelligence and neural links in your brain and all of these things, which is a fantasy. It's not going to do this, and this is one of the this is where we are today. If I had to, you didn't exactly ask this, but the problem is that all of the technology that's being pushed by Western media, Western marketing, Western capital is technology that is, number one, not sustainable because of the energy it uses, the electricity and water and money it uses is impossible to sustain. That's number one. Number two, it doesn't work. Hollywood paints a picture of law enforcement, for example, in which I would get the fingerprints and check CCTV. And do you know that in London, the most surveilled city in the world, the number of cases, legal cases, felony cases that used CCTV was 3%? Because most of the cameras don't work. The images are not reliable. You can't tell anybody. Facial recognition is a joke. It doesn't work. None of this stuff works, but they keep pushing it. And now you have ideas about pre-crime. This was a Philip K. Dick science fiction fantasy 45 years ago. Now Trump is talking about pre-crime and predictive policing. This is just naked fascistic a control mentality that, because it's not technically accurate, they're just going to double down on arresting everybody. And that's what you see ICE agents doing. They don't know who is who, and they don't care. Because they'll just, well, is he illegal? Who cares? Arrest him and deport him. Who cares? He's a poor brown guy, so that's what we can do. And that's what you're seeing. And it's going to, people keep talking about a potential civil war. Well, No, I don't think there's going to be a civil war, but I think there's going to be civil skirmishes, and there's going to be resistance that will take unorthodox forms, because I think a lot of the working class, a lot of the underclass, the unemployed in the United States, with a crumbling infrastructure, nothing to look forward to. They know there's going to be no jobs coming. They are starting to think in terms of resistance. And, if we were to do a cultural analysis here, and talk about why are zombie franchises so popular? Why was The Walking Dead on for however many years it was on, 10 years or something? All these post-apocalyptic films. Well, my theory is because people actually want that unconsciously. They secretly want the end to everything and they can start over. It's a fantasy, but it's an unconscious fantasy. They don't want any more nagging wives or husbands. They don't want mortgage payments and insurance bills and having to feed the kids with rising food prices, rising energy prices. They don't want any of it. It takes a mental strain, and you see the number of people on antidepressants. People would love to tear it all down and start over. If all I had to do was kill a few zombies every day, great, sign me up. I'm on board totally. That's what fuels that vision, and that's what's building under the surface in the West, is a desire for reconstruction, to start the system over again. They don't know how to do it. They're not necessarily politically sophisticated. But they understand that there's no future with people like Joe Biden or Donald Trump and all these appointments. These people, the ruling class, they no longer are trusted or admired by pretty much anybody. And people have awoken to Israel, the problem with Israel. Every assassination you can think of for the last 80 years has been carried out by Mossad. Every one of them. I think Charlie Kirk was killed by Mossad. And I think the public is waking up to this. And it's not necessarily conscious or articulated, but there is a feeling of malaise that is translating into resistance. Will we get a revolution? No, but we'll get something, I think. So that's my answer.
Thank you so much. You mentioned and hint apocalyptic films and stories. As you know, we are seeing a massive surge in post-apocalyptic, anti-hero, and dystopian stories, from shows like The Boys and The Squid Game to countless films. Do you see this as a reflection of a broader collective anxiety about the current world order?
There is a huge disconnect between what the average Western American citizen experiences every day and what they see in Hollywood films, Hollywood TV, advertising. There's enormous disconnect. People listen to Elon Musk talking, and the sense is, besides the fact he's a racist white South African, they think, what is he talking about? What is he, he's spending hundreds of billions of dollars to try to colonize Mars. Nobody wants this. People are starving. People are hungry. 1 in 4 children in the United States lives beneath the poverty line, is food insecure. They don't give a fuck about Mars. They want to eat. They want security for their families and their children. They don't want ICE agents running around arresting people, their neighbors, people from their community. They want none of this. And I think also people are are recognizing that stories like the Jeffrey Epstein story, for example, that this is the real dystopia. People know that almost every elected official can be blackmailed, and that's what's happening somehow. But they don't know the actual mechanisms. So, you see films, all of the various post-apocalyptic films. The Last of Us was very well done, was very well done. But it's still a fantasy. And it's a projection. It's like a wish fulfillment. People aren't afraid of that. They want that. The reality would be much worse because, of course, any apocalypse extinction event would mean that water would be very hard to find, and food would be very hard to find very quickly. But that's never factors in because these are, in a sense, modern fairy tales. So, yeah, I just think we're seeing the public everywhere, all over the world, the people that consume cultural product electronically are experiencing this disconnect. Their daily reality is not what they see on screens at all, on their phones or computers or movie screens. It's just not. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question.
Yeah, sure, you did. During the Cold War, we had films like Rocky, a symbol of American triumph. Now we have protagonists like Joker, who almost embody chaos and collapse. How do you interpret this dramatic shift in this story?
It's interesting. Again, you're asking really good questions.
Thank you.
I think that there has been a rise. The disconnect I was speaking of has given rise to a kind of irrationality in cultural product, and I mean the whole DC and Marvel comics source material is a topic for a huge discussion that we could spend weeks on because there are real psychoanalytic truths there. The original comics for Superman and Batman and stuff in the 1930s, 1940s, these were for adolescent teenagers and preteen boys who felt disempowered and directionless, and they got a vicarious sense of strength from identifying with these characters. But that's no longer the case today. I think this kind of material is like a fascist wet dream for the producers of this stuff. I don't actually know what the general public feels about these films. I find it difficult to gauge because it's this alternate universe that people know is a fantasy. So it's like watching worldwide wrestling, or something. I mean, I don't know what it is. I have so little interest in this stuff personally that it's hard for me to understand why it keeps being made. But I think the idea of a rocky optimism in a certain kind of character, I think the shift has been away from that, partly because the producers in Hollywood today, besides they're almost all Nepo babies, but they're bean counters. They come out of Ivy League schools. They come out of business schools. They don't really think aesthetically or in terms of art, certainly. They think in terms of profit and the bottom line, and that's what they try to focus on. So unconsciously, these films now reflect the repressed material in the ruling class and the producers who make them. Because zombie films, for example, are overdetermined in many ways. I mean, they represent several different symbolic meanings. And one of them is those films, zombies are the working class as viewed by the producers and ruling class, the affluent class, fear the public the way, and they're seen as zombies in the movies. That's the metaphor. The barbarians are at the gates. The zombies are breaking down the barriers. Well, that just means the people are getting restless. Um, so these things happen in multiple ways, and that's back to that Gramsci quote again. This is the interregnum. This is the period of morbid symptoms in which there is no causality of the sort that we are used to. It just doesn't work that way anymore. It's less rational. And look, I should add that there are good shows that get made almost accidentally. Things come out that are surprisingly good. The British spy show may be ultimately reactionary, Slow Horses with Gary Oldman, but it's very witty and very funny, and is a genuine kind of critique because it's so cynical. Last year, Taylor Sheridan's Landman had, imperfect, but it had a kind of sense of veracity, a sense of authenticity for the workers in oil fields in Texas. You started to understand the fantasy of the climate change alarmism that runs through everything. Oh, we have to, cut down trees to plant wind farms. Everybody has to drive an electric car. They never mention the military. They never mention the amount of gas and the pollution caused by the military. Never gets mentioned. And people have started to recognize this. So some of that does appear now and then in film and television. It's not 100% terrible. There are things worth watching, but by and large, it is just a period of, I think, terrible, deep, both conscious and unconscious confusion, and it's why record numbers of people are taking antidepressants because they're not happy.
Great. For the last question, is the decline of American hegemony going to be a dramatic Hollywood-style spectacle?
Yeah. No, I think, as I was saying earlier, in a way, I don't think so. I could be wrong. But see, I think that two things: unrest in the world has to do with Western capital imperialism, the United States and Israel. Not anything else. Everything else can be dealt with. It's not overpopulation, not even pollution, not global warming. None of that's an actual crisis. The actual crisis is political. I think that the U.S., Israel, and Norman Finkelstein and Ilan Pappé, a number of people have said Israel can't survive. It's on its last legs. It will kill as many people as it can, but it can't last. It's not a real country. Well, the United States is dying too. The United States can't fight any wars. They can't fight China or Russia. They can't. They can't fight Venezuela. Mm-hmm. They can fly some planes and bomb Caracas, bomb military installations the way they tried to bomb Yemen. Yemen is the poorest country in the Arab world, and the United States couldn't defeat Yemen. They got their ass kicked by Yemen. Remarkable. The Houthis are remarkable. Venezuela is, the people are completely behind Maduro. They don't want this Peace Prize winner, war freak nut job, Machado to come in. They're not going to tolerate that. And what's the U.S. going to do? Well, they can bomb things like they did in Yemen. They bombed Iran briefly. They can do that. They can't invade Venezuela because they will lose. They don't have the weaponry and the armaments stockpiled. They've given a lot of it away. The manufacturing competence of the U.S. has never been worse. China, Russia, yeah, they know how to do that, not the U.S. anymore. The corruption and inefficiency and waste from the U.S. government and U.S. military is profound. They can't march into Venezuela and take over the country. They can't do it. So what they're doing is rattling sabers and hectoring people and threatening people. But you notice they haven't done anything yet. If they do, it will be catastrophic for the U.S. And I think there are enough people in the military who know this, that they won't really invade. They'll pivot to somebody else. Next will be Colombia. Then they'll pivot away from Colombia and, go attack the Solomon Islands or something. Who can they actually attack? I mean, I don't know. But they'll find somebody tiny enough, Grenada again, to attack. But a real country of 30 million people, they can't do it. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was a great conversation. If you would like to add something more, I'm all ears.
No, it was great. Those were very good questions. I think that it is important for people to think about art and culture in complex ways. There has been the rise of this idea of entertainment, and it's pernicious. Art has importance. Societies die without culture, so we need to cling to it and see its importance. Okay,
thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.